Um, the Americans no longer share a common reality, but we can all agree that Donald Trump has always been in it for the grift. Now, the country has a problem, and it can be summed up in one word: perception. Now, Representative Jim Jordan perceives that it's okay to try to intimidate the district attorney in Manhattan who's investigating Donald Trump. Now, according to a Tuesday tweet from Jordan, um, Americans want affordable groceries, not a Donald Trump prosecution. Actually, the Americans do want a Donald Trump prosecution. Now, Manhattan DA Alvin Bragg says that Jordan is not going to intimidate him. Now, meanwhile, many legal observers perceive that Jordan may have unlawfully interfered in the proceedings of a grand jury. Now, for me, I just want to know why Jordan has the perception that Bragg has anything to do with the price of groceries, because he doesn't. Representative Ted Lieu's perception is that Jordan has lost his marbles, and here's what Ted Lieu said. Um, the former squatter has yet to be charged with a crime, yet Republicans are making serious accusations about a criminal investigation here, without seeing any evidence, and without seeing charging documents, and without any proof of prosecutorial wrongdoing. Now, time and time again, Speaker Kevin McCarthy, Chairman Jim Jordan, and other Republican leaders have sided with the most extreme right wing of the GOP and chosen chaos over governing. Now, clearly, the Speaker of the House is so busy interfering in a criminal investigation that he doesn't have time to present a fucking budget. As for the perception that the Republican Party is being held hostage by Trump and it would like to kick him to the curb, Kurt Bardella of the Los Angeles Times reminds us that it's time to give up that nonsense. Now, anyone who thinks that Republicans have any desire to move on from Trump should abandon this fantasy, because they're not going to move on. They're going to keep licking Trump's nuts until the day he dies. At this point, Republicans such as McCarthy aren't hostages to the former squatter. They're his volunteers and aspiring accomplices. And not to be outdone, Representative Matt Gaetz, the crown prince of crazy clowns and also a pedophile, had chastised Florida Governor Ron DeSantis for not jumping into the breach to keep Trump from being extradited to New York to face charges that has not yet been filed. And it's all Gaetz' perception that while he too has not seen any evidence in the New York case, which hasn't been filed, any legal action taken against Dandy Don is unwarranted. I guess we should also mention that these are the very same people who had the perception that Hillary Clinton should be locked up too, although they had no evidence that she had done anything wrong, even after numerous congressional hearings. Now, Donald Trump doesn't give a shit about anyone or about this case either. It's his perception that whatever happens to him can be used to raise more money. Over the weekend, he leaked a story that he would be arrested on Tuesday, which didn't happen, and that was a big disappointment that it didn't happen. The following day, he demanded that whoever leaked the information be held accountable, and then by the end of the day, he was asking his sycophants for money to fight the bogus charges that hadn't been filed yet, and again had been leaked by him. Some perceived that Donald Duck set it all up just to make money. Now, speaking of perceptions, there is a general perception that covering the White House is glamorous. Now, for example, this week the cast of Ted Lasso showed up in the White House briefing room to talk about mental health, and then the following day, the press corps got to watch President Biden present 24 awards celebrating the arts and humanity. Now, Bruce Springsteen, Gladys Knight, and Julia Louis-Dreyfus were among those being honored. Now, the press never really got to ask questions of the Lasso cast, although as Jason Sudeikis exited the stage, people managed to ask him if his fictional team would fare better than 20th place. After all, there is no 21st place in the English Premier League. He looked askance until he got the joke the night before. The question was a central part of a Ted Lasso episode that involved a press conference, and then he smiled and said yes. He refrained, however, from doing so, from doing his Joe Biden impression, when NBC's Kelly O'Donnell asked. I guess he didn't want to give the impression that he was being rude, and you got the real one here, he told O'Donnell with a smile. Now, that particular day was marred by a gadfly reporter who started off the briefing by griping that he never gets called on, and even before Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre asked for questions. That reporter never actually asked a question. He just whined for 15 minutes. O'Donnell asked for decorum several times, and former WHCA President Jeff Mason of Reuters quietly tried to reprimand this question, and reprimanded that person who just prattled on, trying to bully the press, the guests, and the press secretary. I'm all for a good question, but I'll save a good wine for dinner. Now, in my perception, he was acting like a spoiled bitch. After all, he could always go upstairs to the press office and ask his questions like the rest of us. And the perception of the rest of the press is that he just wanted some me time on camera. And so, in the finest football coach voice, I reminded him that the rest of us are here too, pal, and then admonished him for impinging on everyone else who was only here trying to do their job. And the guy got fucking quiet. And so much for the glamour. The next day, during the Arts and Humanities Award, people got to stand in the very back of the East Room, and the White House escort took the press through the Home Depot section of the White House, and it was filled with freezers, food, a kitchen entrance, rakes, shovels, and other implements of destruction before walking up the stairs to the East Room. People conspicuously avoid the guests, and most of the time the White House treats the press like feral cats, and we're good to have around to chase the mice, but the staff doesn't want us meeting guests. Of course, that's basically with everybody. Basically, people watched the ceremony and then were quietly escorted back through the steerage section before being deposited unceremoniously outside the briefing room. And some of the people had the additional perk of standing next to a reporter who shall remain nameless, who either hadn't bathed in 3 weeks or more likely had consumed several cloves of garlic for lunch that day. Now, we're not fucking complaining, but being in the front row of history is great. It's not just as glamorous as the reception. Now, the ripples of our perception make their way across everything in our lives. In Florida, the Satanist perceives that talking about menstrual cycles is harmful, but he also has the perception that banning drag shows and not saying the word gay will solve his perceived closeted self-loathing. Now, for others, the perception is that we are safely navigating our way through the uncharted waters of the war in Ukraine. Even as tension increases and builds, the U.S. continues to analyze the contents of a Chinese spy balloon brought down in the American territorial waters after it traversed the heart of the country, and will never publicly acknowledge what we fucking found, but a national security expert said on background, but we got everything valuable from the payload. The U.S. lost a drone over the Black Sea when it was headbutted by a Russian fighter jet, and they got nothing. It was wiped clean before it went down, the same expert explained, and we watched President Xi Jinping of China pal around with Vladimir Putin in Russia. Now that only shows how desperate Russia is and how concerned China is with their influence around the world, and that's an interesting perception. Now Putin, meanwhile, wanted to promote the perception that he was so brave as Biden, which basically background. So he recently visited Mariupol in the portion of in Ukraine that was held by Russian forces. Sure, it's far from the fighting, unlike Kiev, which is under siege and frequently bombed. Biden went to Kiev. Putin took a leisurely stroll in Mariupol, and apparently bragged about how Russia is already rebuilding there, as if that's a fucking good thing. They wouldn't have to rebuild there, John Kirby reminded us from the podium in the press briefing room on Tuesday, if Russia hadn't bombed it. And it turns out Kirby and the rest of the world have a different perception than Putin about Russia's magnanimous humanitarian efforts in occupied Ukraine here. But Putin has shown no signs of quitting the war he started, nor has he shielded away from the perception that the war is somehow his fault. Now, meanwhile, there are members of the GOP who have the perception that giving up on our friends in Ukraine is somehow good for democracy. The perception of their critics is that those in the Republican Party who argue that point are addicted to either Adderall or smoking crack. As it turns out, perception is a tricky thing, mostly made of misperceptions that often spring from disinformation, fiction, greed, and narcissism. And in nearly every speech that Biden has made since he hit the campaign trail in the 2020 general election, he has said, "Let's remember who we are. We are the United States of America. There's nothing we can't do. We put our minds to it." His emphasis was always on united, and he often says in these speeches that we're at an inflection point in America's history. It's clearly Biden's perception that we labor under misperceptions because of disinformation, which continues to stoke our division and keeps us from solving some serious problems. Hence, the media circus around Donald Trump continues to warp our perceptions. But there are many who agree with him. Derek Robertson, one of the creators of the Boys comic book, offered this perception on Twitter. What we're witnessing in real time is mainstream media treating the lulls in politics like entertainment. Now, while the lull moves at its normal iceberg pace, and a candidate born of TV entertainment happy is to exploit it all, consequences be fucking damned. Now, in my perception, this man has a valid point. So if you like the video, you can give the video a like and subscribe to my channel, RBW King. You can also hit the notification bell so that you'll be notified when a new video comes out. and you can go ahead and leave a comment. Let me know what you think. And if you want to support my work and my brother, you can donate to my Patreon link, which you can find in the About section of YouTube. And for just a little as a few bucks a month, your donation can help go a long way. And thanks for listening.